One thing that I feel we never get enough of in media is the idea of evil mechs. Not evil robots, everyone can see those coming from a mile away, from Terminator, battle droids to those things in the Matrix. I'm not talking about robots, I'm talking about giant stuff like the tripods from War of the Worlds, Decepticons. Ultron, technically speaking, I think he gets massive in some continuities in the comics. Bigger isn't always better, but when you see stuff like Unicron, then yeah, bigger is better. Honestly, the idea of a massive robot fighting is something that a lot of us can get behind. There's no massive speech about art or life or the pursuit of happiness here, unless happiness to you looks like a real steel cage match between Charlemagne and Satan. Chaos Knights are probably the faction with the least amount of lore in 40k, and I'm counting things like Harlequins as well here. Genuinely, these things exist to aura farm in a setting that is in a generational aura renaissance. But what are Chaos Knights? Where did they come from, and why should you sell your souls to the Dark Gods for glory, power, and most important than all, destruction? Before we get into that, hello, I am Dadium, the man in the broken tower. This time getting back into 40k, despite the fact that it was around my birthday, as well as being May, which I usually contribute as being Star Wars month. But I wanted a break, so easy video this time around. No shilling this time, other than I made a video about Mandalorians. Go watch it. My brother made some art for it. So what is a Chaos Knight? In essence, it is just a knight household that has fallen to chaos, either because of general corruption, deception, or in some cases, the knight itself ends up becoming corrupted unbeknownst to its princeps. This ends up becoming a larger topic about machine spirits themselves, which I really don't want to waste on this video. I think it's worth having its own video altogether, but that's stuff for the future. For anyone who is wondering why I'm not going over the history of knights, I made a Imperial Knights video. Go watch it. Knights started out as farm equipment and got tricked out. That's about it. So why would a knight fall to chaos? Sometimes it's just that the households got promised a lot by Horus during the heresy, fell to chaos, and they kind of stayed around because you can't really leave chaos. That being said, the Throne Mechanicum. It is a seat for a knight pilot, and depending on the machine spirit of the knight, retains the consciousness of previous pilots. So you have an avatar lineage thing going on, but what ends up happening to some of these knights is that they become iconoclast households, where the machine spirits of the knight get corrupted and forcibly takes over itself, strips control from its pilots, and keeps them entombed forever, while the psychic whiplash from the constant dread torture all those trapped inside the Throne Mechanicum. And that's about the only thing that makes the origins of the Chaos Knights different. Sure, there are millennia-long feuds between certain nice households, but be honest with me, do you care about Game of Thrones light, or do you want to hear about the unique Chaos Knights that make these guys fun? We're mostly going to be talking about dreadblades towards the end of this video when it comes to the known knights. Well, you know, what is a dreadblade? It is similar to a free blade in Imperial Knights, the big difference being that free blades usually are on some kind of a quest or they get hired out as mercenaries. Most Chaos Knights are just angry, hateful machine spirits. They don't really have a use for money or anything, really. So Chaos Knights kind of just, they kind of just show up. Some houses still have living pilots with like grudges and feuds and all that, but there's one Chaos Knight who also kind of just spawns out of like a pool of blood. We'll talk about them later. The armor of Chaos Knights is very similar to that of Imperial Knights. The reason for that being is that Chaos Knights for a while were just the same kit as Imperial Knights, just painted different. There was an upgrade sprue, and eventually ended up getting dedicated units like the Abominant, the Desecrator, and the many variations of War Dogs, which frankly are just the best. It's an army of just chicken dog mechs. I expect something a little bit shorter this time around because there's not a lot to go off of when it comes to Chaos Knights, but their loadouts are really funny, even when compared to like other knights. You have the Desecrator. It's the tank hunting knight armed with a massive las cannon that tears vehicles in half, as well as for some reason keeps a giant chainsword just in case somebody gets a bit too close, then they need to get turned into a sirloin. There's the Rampager, armed with a massive chainsword and a massive power fist, because why carry one melee weapon when you can have two options? And speaking of options, the Knight Despoiler. Have you ever wanted to dual-wield siege cannons? Well, now you can. With a Knight Despoiler, you get a very boring unit, but it's able to customize and equip itself with pretty much anything from the standard knight loadout. Do you want to dual-wield power fists? What about dual-wielding Gatling cannons? 36 heavy bolter shots may not sound like a lot, but 36 heavy bolter shots also kill most things in the game. Ask me how I know. Personally, my favorite loadout aside from dual Gatling cannons is 2 melta cannons, because it's purely the gambler's fallacy. 99% of Demon Breath thermal cannon users switch to Gatling cannons right before they're about to one-shot a Warhound Titan. I'm getting ahead of myself because there's legitimately, outside of the Horus Heresy, no lore for Chaos Knights. I think they get like a slight mention in Assassin Norum Kingmaker. Actually, no, I think they're a big thing in Assassin Arm Kingmaker. I could be completely wrong. I can't remember. That being said, the Chaos Knights have their own unique stuff that makes them fun, like their own unique kits, but also the Knight Abominant. In terms of the tabletop, this is the only Psyker Knight to exist. Psyker Princeps exist in lore, there's Psi Titans and stuff like that, but the Abominant is the only actual Titanic model that has psychic powers. There's something very cool and also terrifying about the fact that the Chaos Gods are not just able to corrupt machine spirits, but also bless the machines themselves. We see this in the Gonsko series and the Mechanicus books. Technology can get corrupted, but it's also cool to see a representation of that on the tabletop. Demon engines exist for sure, but that's not the same as the Chaos Gods looking at a mech and saying, here's a little treat, and then they give it a little bit of satanic power for its troubles. Also, on the topic of Chaos Knights, I did catch some art of still living pilots, and it's safe to say they look as bad as the normal pilots, especially the ones who choose to be entombed. The other thing that someone is probably asking is, how are there still Chaos Knight pilots that are alive if these people were around during the time of the Horus Heresy? Aside from the fact that the warp is fucky and time dilation is a suggestion and a rule at the same time over there, most dreadblades, funnily enough, come from houses that are still loyal to the Imperium. As always, we keep up with the long-running tradition of the Imperium being its own worst enemy. I think the War Dogs are truly the biggest thing about Chaos Knights that you look at and think are cool. You have armigers in Imperial Knights, which are these shitty little squires that don't really do anything. They just, well, except for objectives, I guess. But in Chaos Knights, you have War Dogs, which are literal mechanical war crimes that exist not to do objectives, though they still can, but instead their sole purpose in life is to kill everything. You have War Dogs with melta cannons, autocannons, and chainswords like the normal armigers. Then you have one with a Gatling cannon, some with power claws, and all of these are different variations and combinations with rules to supplement them. The funny thing is that in lore, some Chaos Knight households who still maintain some semblance of like sanity and order view War Dog pilots as scum of the earth. Being a War Dog pilot, according to them, is the lowest form of life, which is hilarious because then it creates this air of treachery and sabotage from these pilots, and they always look for a way to fuck over their lords, not necessarily to usurp them. Sometimes it's just to kill them so that way they can be free of them. After all, a War Dog can also be a dreadblade, much as in the way an armiger can also be a dreadblade. They sometimes just go off and do their own thing. I think in the most recent Chaos Knights Codex, or this was the previous one, I can't remember which, there's two rumored pattern of War Dogs that haven't been shown off yet, which are pretty interesting. The Iron Wraith is supposed to be sneaky. I don't know how. I just did a Raven Guard video and the warp works in mysterious ways, so I'm not going to question it. But the War Dog Decapitator, spelled with K because of course it is, apparently is supposed to be some sort of heavy weapons platform, as if Chaos Knights aren't already carrying heavy weapons, but I'm imagining like a smaller laser destroyer on an armiger-sized body meant to take out tanks. Hell, it might just also be a War Dog with precision on its weapons. I don't know. It'd be funny if we got to see some of that on the tabletop. Maybe we'll see them soon? Who knows? I do want to talk about some of the notable dreadblades before we get towards the end of this video, because there's not much else, and in terms of the cool factor of Chaos Knights, dreadblades are pretty much what you care about. Sure, there's some knight households that, I don't know, are relatively interesting. I don't think so. I think like the Titanic Chaos households kind of just fall off after you learn about the DC array because the DC array is cool. But in terms of cool factor, and also just like 40k being awful, the Sire of Doom, it's not necessarily special, but how it was made is just peak 40k to me. After the Dark Mechanicum defeated a knight house, House Dayton, I think is how it's pronounced, the heretics dragged their captives, including knights and their pilots, into the heart of a soul forge, where the knight itself was wired up to building-sized torture devices where it was exposed to the currents of the warp. The pilot stuck inside of it was tortured as well for a year. Some of the pilots ended up having their bodies literally explode by having the warp current literally tear them asunder. Only a single knight remained, and in a great ritual was the pilot forcefully entombed for eternity, and the knight was dubbed the Sire of Doom, a massive tortured machine spirit that now follows the orders of the Dark Mechanicum, with its pilot trapped inside of it, forever forced to bear witness to all the destruction and mayhem that its own machine causes. Incarnate Slaughter is probably the one that a lot of people were excited for me to talk about, but it was a normal knight that ended up falling to chaos. It was sent to defend against High Fleet Hydra on a doomed defense. Every other knight in the household ended up dying one by one until only Incarnate Slaughter remained, killing so many Tyranids that the knight itself was waist high in the blood and guts of Xenos. A warp breach ended up being summoned underneath it and dragged the knight inside. Incarnate Slaughter does not just appear to any battle, but only the battle with the most blood, gore, and viscera, that it creates a literal lake and then does it rise out of this blood like Baron fucking Harkonnen. And then of course, there is now a 10-story tall robot that will proceed to decimate the entire battlefield. Imagine you're just an Imperial Guardsman and after 45 hours of fighting straight, the Nids seem to finally be on the run, only for a giant pool of blood to summon a 100-foot tall god of metal and destruction like he's the Undertaker. Being a human sucks, man. The Gilded King I don't really find particularly interesting, minus this one little quirk about them. It's a Knight Destructor piloted by a High King, or I think just a king in general, with its only sole goal in life when it fell to chaos was to annihilate all traces of civilization from its world. It would tear other Knight pilots out of their cockpits just to personally end them using its chainsword. There are levels of petty that I must respect. Death Saber is a Knight Rampager that after 250 years of fighting has become covered in so much skin claimed by its opponents that cultists started to follow the Knight in great processions believing it to be a chaos god. The weirdest thing and the most hilarious thing is that the Knights started to attract packs of flayed ones. Necrons who have gone insane and start to drape themselves in skin trying to return to flesh, those flayed ones ended up slaughtering the cultists and they now follow Death Saber because they believe it to be a manifestation of Landu Gor, the Flayer god. The funniest thing, beyond all of this, not the fact that it attracted flayed ones to begin with, is the fact that Death Saber is so insane to this point, it does not recognize the difference between the cultists it once had and the flayed ones that are now following it around. Hand of Mourning is just next levels of hate. It was one of many Imperial Freeblades captured after the Black Legion came to invade a world. Once captured, they were brought to Vorash the Soul Flayer, a master possession who subjected the Freeblades to insane torture and rituals. The Freeblade of what would become the Hand of Mourning was, and I quite literally mean, pumped full of sludge rendered from the writhing corpses of the recently possessed. Now reborn as the Hand of Mourning, Vorash has gained a powerful dreadblade to do his bidding. Its last mission was being given the true name of an ancient demon prince and told to bring it back to Vorash by any means necessary. Why? Because chaos is its own worst enemy. This one has no lore, but Infernix and Glorium is a Knight Despoiler dual-wielding thermal cannons. I'm telling you, it's a way of life. The last thing I want to do to pad out this video is talk about my own Chaos Knights, of which I have 3 to show off to you, and other named ones that I'm currently planning out for the future. The title of their warband is in the works, but as of now, they are known as the Knights of the Black Sabbath, and yes, all of these knights are named after Black Sabbath songs. In the lore of the Broken Tower, the knights only follow the most destructive force they can respect, and that being Drask Vong and Gravemarch, the Bane of Colossi. Known for charging headfirst into Titans and coming out on top, the two gained the respect of the Knights of the Black Sabbath and were recruited by Dodium to fight for the Broken Tower. The first is their leader, the titular Black Sabbath, and Acastus Knight Asterius. Black Sabbath is the oldest, largest, and most destructive member of the band. Armed with, of course, twin-linked conversion beam cannons on each arm, atop its carapace is an ancient weapon of unknown origin. A weapon that, as long as the knight has been serviced to the Broken Tower, has never been fired. The only people who know what this weapon can do are Drask Vong and Dodium. Dodium has since elected the weapon to not be fired. Whether or not it's a world killer or can tear a hole through reality, perhaps it doesn't even work at all, is unknown, but there are constant rumors floating amongst those working in the tower that bear witness to Black Sabbath. And the reason for these rumors is that Black Sabbath is only ever deployed if a world is deemed unworthy of still standing. Iron Man, the Cerastus Knight Lancer, their story is a more readily available one. A custom pattern of knight, it was found on a mining world where it maintained some air of authority, either as a giant silent guardian or by keeping the workers in line. An artifact was eventually uncovered during the mining operations and originally was sealed away due to the fact that just being near it caused workers to become sick, dying, or eventually homicidal. It wasn't known that these were just side effects to what its true power was. The artifact altered machines. Appearing as a giant slab of jagged metal, it wasn't known that the artifact was a massive mask that was once worn by ancient Xenon species that have long since died out on the planet. It spoke to the knight, even when it was powered off, tempting it again and again. Until one day, the knight activated on its own, tearing through hab blocks, defenses, and grabbing a massive slab of metal to protect itself from the defending garrisons, tearing away an industrial mining drill to start puncturing tanks that got in its way. Only when it rammed through a defensive structure to reach the mask did it don it on and thus became Iron Man, bearing a slab of metal rather than a void shield projector, and bearing a drill lance that has since started to melt from how many tanks it had bored through. Iron Man is fast, aggressive, and brutal. Used solely as a spearhead, Iron Man specializes in breaking through defensive lines, taking down anything its own size, or smaller if you decide to piss it off. The last of the fully built knights is the first one I ever finished, which is funny because I originally owned an Imperial Knight, put him back on the shelf, and then finished this entire knight before I ever went back to him. A Knight Despoiler known as Warpig. Once a free blade, fighting against the World Eaters, engaging in melee combat was not the best thing for it to do, but as the Legion continued to assail the world it defended, the world started to corrupt because, as we all know, chaos corrupts everything around it. Duty became hatred, honor became spite. The chivalry code the Freeblade once followed was turned on its head. Originally a Dominus pattern knight, the Freeblade found it to be slow. So he took the legs off of the knight and mounted the tracks of a destroyed Baneblade onto it, removed the anti-tank weaponry for massive Gatling cannons to tear apart Astartes quicker. But soon enough, the Gatling cannons weren't enough. So the Freeblade mounted more weapons, melta guns, rapid fire mortars, even 2 siege cannons, and it all came ahead when its signature Dozer blade was mounted on the front. The Freeblade was cautious. Caution eventually turned into overwhelming firepower, which then turned into intense aggression. It no longer defended those around it. If you were in its line of fire, you were reduced to a red mist. If you were along its warpath, you were quickly run over and made part of the earth. Warpig found itself winning. It found itself making the World Eaters fall back. Under the might of its firepower, it made Astartes tremble. But with no Marines left to fight in front of it, it turned around and saw tens of thousands of guardsmen in reserve, now with no enemy to fight. The World Eaters fought for 23 days and retreated. Warpig fought the Guardsmen for 23 hours, and not a single one survived. A one-night army, Warpig solely exists for war and nothing else. Currently being planned are Children of the Grave, a Knight Abominant that I'm trying to figure out if I can 3D print it stepping out of some sort of a portal, or if I can change the base to make it look like it's stepping out of a grave. I'm envisioning a giant mech wielding a scythe, breathing literal death surrounded by a swarm of ravens. Hand of Doom is a Knight Rampager that sustained intense damage with only one arm left remaining, the Hand of Doom. You ever seen Tyberos's like massive chain fist with the 3 chain blades under and mounted on the top? Imagine that but with a Chaos Knight. Heaven and Hell, or as I'm trying to figure out if it should be Heaven and Hell or Heaven or Hell, is a Knight chassis that I haven't settled on yet, but I want to make it a sort of mockery of the Imperium's religion, with demented paintings alongside its armor, scripture hanging off, and possibly use pieces of statues as like armor or like explosive reactive armor, if you get my drift. But like I said, I'm debating on this because I don't know how I want it to look in the end. Also, Heaven or Hell is supposed to be a Guilty Gear reference because honestly, the Guilty Gear soundtrack is just crazy, but this is supposed to be Black Sabbath homage. I even took Iron Man out into a tournament after Ozzy died. There is so much more I want to do with my Chaos armies, and I think that's what makes them fun. GW, when this faction started out, just gave us a rule set and transfers. They didn't even release an actual Chaos Knight kit for years. This entire faction was an afterthought, but the idea of giant evil robots fighting alongside Chaos was too good to pass up. In Warhammer, there are 2 ideas when it comes to our hobby: the rule of cool and your guys. Both interact with each other in some way, but rule of cool is nobody cares about logic. Nobody cares if it might look weird. If it looks cool to you, that's what matters. And then there is your guys. These are your miniatures. Your guys, you can make them whatever you want, paint them however you want, and in Chaos Knights, you get a massive canvas to paint on, a giant slab of marble to chisel away and make into anything. And now, you can make it sick as fuck. Heavy metal, ancient religion, horror movies, you can take any piece of literature, media, or anything and bring it to life as a 100-foot tall mechanical menace that goes stomping around in an actual game where, yes, those 36 heavy bolter shots can wipe out any Marine squad. Those twin thermal cannons are basically a second sun. There used to be a rule, I think it was even a stratagem at one point, that if you killed a vehicle in melee with a Chaos Knight and you had a power fist, you could throw that vehicle to a nearby enemy squad. Chaos Knights fucking rule. And them having no lore doesn't matter, because when you get to pilot a massive robot that can run through buildings and dual named characters and win, why wouldn't you play this army? I don't have any Chaos Knights quotes for you, so instead have this one from Vastor. Danger is a down payment on success. Thanks for listening. Sorry if this video is late, I should have done this earlier, but I blame you all for being very entertaining in the Discord for my procrastination. Also, Red Dead Redemption 2 is pretty fun. As always, a big ol' thank you to the people who support the channel, that being CBJor95, The Hog, Toaster, M. Felicia, Mount Papa 11, Josh from Allstate, Balding Dragon 62, Regular Alley, Suspendor, Javier Soto, Matt the Jam Man, Overdraft Perfection, Envy, The Coffee Addict, Zachary Y, The God Emperor of R, Alexander McCabe, Ritz, Arctic Berserker, Omidium, Captain Bubbles, and Corespore. And as always, an even bigger thank you to these fine folks, that being Jokimitsu 45, Celtic, Human Spirit Indominus, John Papa John, Icigo 11, Crazy Axeman, Commander Apo CC 1119, Solace in the Void, Fat Nuts Man, Nameless Ghoul Ease, Everlost Man, Gap G, Ism, Felix, Up Down Down Left Right, Istra, Robbie Nito, and Ape Brain Esquire. Trying to get the How to Homebrew video done, or at least the script done, so I can start working on that. I should hopefully have time soon to be able to get that one done as well. Next up is Xenos. I think it's time. I think we're going to do NIDS. See y'all in a bit.